The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the ANA or its members. On today's episode of On Scope, Northwestern University's Jonathan Copulsky joins me to discuss marketing in the age of Trump 2.0. And on marketing news you might have missed, media transparency concerns. They're back! In AI form! Great! All that next on Scope. Everybody, we are back. This is On Scope, the marketing podcast brought to you by the ANA and powered by Odyssey, a leading audio platform. You can get all your favorite podcasts, music, and entertainment on the Odyssey app. I'm your host, Mike Berberich, and with me, as always, is Ryan Dinger, producer of On Scope. Ryan, I feel great. I'm so happy to be back. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty well. I gotta tell you, a week off looks good on you, buddy.
Oh my goodness.
You're reinvigorated.
Gracious. I really am. I'm a new man. I'm ready to take on the rest of this year.
I love it.
So, and you know, honestly, I love that we're jumping back into a topic that couldn't be more relevant if we tried, and we try every single day here at On Scope.
Oh yes, very hard.
So that's just going to be great. We've got an amazing guest here. I'm going to get into that in a little bit because how could I skip past one of my favorite parts of every episode, and that is marketing news you might have missed.
That's right, Mike. We've got a story today from Marketing Dive. Here's the headline for you. IAB report. AI adoption for campaigns lags amid data and transparency concerns. And a couple bullet points from the story. Only 30% of agencies, brands, and publishers have fully integrated artificial intelligence across their media campaign life cycles, per the IAB's State of Data 2025 report. While half of those who haven't yet fully integrated AI across their media campaigns expect to do so by 2026, most do not have a strategic roadmap. Half of brands are also concerned about a lack of transparency into how agency and publishing partners use AI on their behalf. Sounds familiar, doesn't it, Mike?
It sounds really familiar, Ryan, and it would be like something if this were 10 years ago, but this is like really recent memory. Let's jump into it. So first of all, I know that this wasn't explicitly said, but it feels like this lag of full AI integration is being framed as a bad thing.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't know that I agree with that.
I actually agree. It seems that, at least from IAB or how the story's positioning it, that this is, these are agencies and brands and publishers sort of lagging behind the trend. And, you hear all the hype about AI and it's maybe a little eyebrow raising that you're not seeing these organizations adopt it at quite the rate that you would think based on how the technology is discussed.
Yeah, man, I mean, but the thing is, where are all of the addressed concerns with AI? I mean, last week before I left, we were concerned about accuracy. We were concerned about data privacy. We were concerned about knowing what you put into this AI. Where's it going? Where is it being stored? Was that all like wrapped up in the week that I took off?
Evidently not, or at least not in the minds of brands, agencies, and publishers.
Yeah, and here's another little funny thing. So half of the people who haven't fully integrated AI expect to do so by 2026 and don't have a strategic roadmap.
Yeah.
So what's that based on other than what your boss told you?
I think that's probably what's driving it, is that executives are very interested in this technology. They want to see it rolled out. They've been told it's revolutionary. It's going to optimize things, make things more efficient. And they don't really care how it happens. They just want to see we're using AI.
Yeah, listen, I'm all about deadlines. Like, you can't just float in the sky until you get around to something. They're very useful. They're big part of my own scatterbrained operational philosophy. But, getting it right is so much more important than getting it done quickly.
Hmm.
And I know that's so easy for me to sit back and like armchair quarterback this thing. Like, yes, the people who get it right first are going to have an insane quantum leap advantage over people who are lagging behind.
Which the story does note, by the way.
Oh, very cool, very cool. But I was going to say, I wonder how many of that 30% that's fully integrated, whatever that really means. And I kind of wonder if there was like a presented definition of this is what we're
Yeah.
considering. Does this look like you? What percentage of that 30% had like a great strategic roadmap to get where they are right now?
Yeah, right. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because they did give a little bit of information about, how this survey was positioned.
Excellent.
Only about half of the agencies, brands, and publishers responding are using or planning to use any of the 18 solutions proposed by the surveyors, such as long-term strategic roadmaps, clear use cases or defined KPIs to overcome the AI adoption challenges for their media campaigns. Additionally, only 20% are putting in place AI boards or contract clauses, which will leave them open to biased outputs, data breaches, and compliance failures.
I guess in the interest of speed?
Yeah, it sort of feels like we're still stuck in this early 2010 Silicon Valley mentality where it's like you just go and build the plane while you're flying, right? And if you fail, and you learn from that. And when you're talking about biased outputs, data breaches, and compliance failures, I don't know that the Silicon Valley mentality is the one that you want to take.
No. Like, listen, we did all of this like less than 10 years ago. Programmatic.
Yep.
Like, let's not pretend that we don't have the exact layout of how this goes. We poured trillions of dollars down the drain because we just wanted quick and right time, right place, right customer. Like,
Yep.
and we just trusted implicitly, blindly. Like, can we please use this as like a take two, please? Please?
Yeah, I mean, you said 10 years ago, I believe it was 2016 that the ANA's programmatic media transparency study came out.
Yep.
So 9 years ago, basically a decade.
Yeah.
And it seems like the lessons that should have been learned from that, which, by the way, we're still working through those.
Yes.
issues. That's not even solved yet.
Absolutely.
But now we're going to do the same thing with AI implementation.
Well, that's just fantastic. Guys, I know we like to make fun. We make light, and we like to have a little fun here on Scope.
We like to have a little fun here.
Oh yeah, we like to joke a little, But really, I implore you to push back about this. We need it done last week mentality. AI is going to serve you incredibly if you take a thoughtful, strategic approach to it and really prioritize your brand's well-being and the fundamentals of marketing. It will punish you in equal measure if you do this to get it done and check that box.
Yeah. I mean, it can't just be a solution in search of a problem.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And that's what all the experts tell you. It's find the issues that you're trying to solve first. Start there. That's the strategic roadmap.
Yes.
What are we solving for?
Yep.
Don't just roll it out because it's fancy and fun and new, but that is a story as old as time when it comes to marketing.
Ryan, I couldn't put it better myself. So that is marketing news you might have missed. And now we are rolling into a very, very important conversation.
Oh, baby.
And we got the perfect guest to have it with. Our guest today is a senior lecturer of marketing at Northwestern University. He's a retired partner with Deloitte, where he served as Global Insights Leader and CMO for Deloitte's U.S. consulting business. He's the author of Brand Resilience. He's the co-author of The Technology Fallacy and The Transformation Myth.
Those are some bona fides.
Yeah, absolutely. And today, he's with us to discuss marketing in the age of Trump 2.0. This is my talk with Jonathan Copulsky. With me today in the pod, Jonathan Copulsky. Thank you so much for joining us here on Scope. How are you this morning, my friend?
I'm good, Michael. Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, honestly, it's our pleasure, and really, I don't think this discussion could come at a better time. We are talking about the reality of how brands and marketers and advertisers, the entire ecosystem, should be acting or should be thinking about going into this brand new administration. Now, regardless of politics, I want to get it out right at the stop. This is not kind of a politically driven discussion. I think we can all agree that Trump is an unconventional president, historically speaking. Now, what are the different categories brands fall into in terms of this administration's impact? Because it's not affecting every company equally, correct?
Absolutely. So I agree 100% that we have a president right now who's not a conventional president when it comes to brands, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to media. And when I think about different types of companies and brands and how they are impacted by the president, certainly the first thing that comes to mind is brands that do business with the government. So these could be defense
Mm-hmm.
contractors, management consultants, the whole range of organizations who derive a significant portion of their revenues from doing business with the federal government. But all of those people are on notice, I think, right now about behaving in a way that's consistent with how Trump views the world and are
Mm-hmm.
at risk if they behave in a way that's inconsistent with that perspective. They run the risk of losing a significant amount of business. I can think of, for example, my former association was with Deloitte. Deloitte is a major government contractor in excess of $1 billion worth of revenue annually from there. They appear, I think, number 14 on a recently published list of top government contractors. So they've got to be
Wow.
very careful about whatever they might say in public, in private, about what they think about the behavior of the current presidents, the policies, et cetera. So there's a whole slew of brands that fit into that category. Make sense?
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there are others, who may not necessarily be getting revenues directly from the federal government, but they're doing business with those companies that are. And then in
Mm-hmm.
addition, they may have businesses which are dramatically impacted by the decisions that the government makes. So those could be organizations which in the car manufacturing business right now, where there's talk about tariffs and what the impact of tariffs will be on those who manufacture cars, the GMs of the world, the Fords of the world, all of
Absolutely.
those brands need to be thoughtful about what the government might be doing and how they lean into it or lean away from it. And then there are brands who, you know, basically, they have taken a political stance on things. They've taken a political stance around things like DEI. They've taken a political stance around women's right to choose and so forth. And they need to be
Mm-hmm.
particularly careful lest there be some backlash against them as a result of the government. And one of the things which makes this particular administration unique is, first of all, you've got a president who has his own media platform, Trump Social.
Yeah.
So he's able to use that to potentially influence people to behave in a certain way. And then right now he's closely allied with Elon Musk, who has what we used to call Twitter, now called X. And
Right,
that
right.
has become a powerful platform in and of itself. So not only can Trump do some things in terms of taking executive actions against brands or for brands, but can also influence millions of other people because of his influence on these platforms.
Jonathan, I think you just set up this whole conversation so well. Because, yeah, this isn't really a first blush thing. This is something we need to take a deep look into. And I know that for a lot of those brands, they would absolutely love to kind of go about business as usual, nothing to see here, folks. I've heard it over and over that brands don't want to be quote unquote political. In 2025, what does that even really mean? And do you think it's possible?
Yeah, I don't know, Michael. This is one of the things I struggle with. It used to be, when we thought about brands, we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what the politics were for most brands. Now, there are exceptions, and we can talk about those too. But for the most part, whether we were making cereal, making cars, whatever we were doing, we went about that. And our job as brand stewards was really
Mm,
help to build the image of the brand in people's minds. This is a fun car. This is a wonderful cereal to have in the morning. This is a fantastic, restaurant to go and dine at. And we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what the politics were associated with each of those brands. We enjoyed the brands for themselves. And as somebody who was a CMO and somebody who works with a lot of CMOs, the job there was to help to create a positioning in people's minds, which convinced people why this was the best choice for the goal that they were hiring the brand to do.
hmm.
So now we're in this world in which it's pretty hard to avoid politics. It used to be a short time ago that it was au courant to put your pronouns on your email signature.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that came like a wave.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, if you were not putting pronouns on your email signature, people were like, well, isn't he with it? And all of a sudden now we're in a world where pronouns have become political. If you've got pronouns in your email, you are making a statement. And certainly if you're one of those brands that expects to do business with the government, forget about it. It's just not going to
Yeah.
happen. So I think it's much more easy to unintentionally sort of tread into these waters, which are around, dangerous waters for a brand by looking like they're political, even if there was no intention to do so. So it could be about hiring practices, it could be about things like pronouns, it could be
Hmm.
about which actors you choose to be your spokespeople. All those suddenly become fraught with political
Yeah.
challenges and an opportunity for a somebody to say, well, why are you using that person? Why are you saying those things and so forth? And so I think that brands need to work a lot harder to be apolitical. And
Hmm.
um, I think they also run the risk of doing some things which are completely unintended, but somebody picks up on them and then it becomes this. Now, this could work both ways. So I live in Chicago. And
Hmm.
past weekend, if you went down Rush Street, there is a Tesla dealership, and there were people outside protesting Tesla because you've got leader of Tesla who is viewed as allied with the current administration and is making actions as a result of his affiliation with Doge. And
Hmm.
that has some backlash for that brand. And you read stories about how brands are now suddenly, or people who own Teslas are suddenly thinking about turning back their Teslas, ending their leases early, et cetera, et cetera. So, a car which, oh, I don't know, a couple of years ago, people viewed as this was a leading edge, innovative vehicle led by
Yep.
somebody who was a leading edge thinker, now suddenly has become contaminated with what that same individual is doing in a government affiliated position leading this Doge effort. So this is
Oh yeah, I could not agree with you more, and I'm glad that you kind of added that this is like in every direction. It's not even like agree with the powers that be and everything's going to be fine for you. Everybody's threading this needle, and I feel like being quote unquote apolitical might be even more difficult than threading the needle for what works for your brand. And I'd love to actually go into that a little bit further for purpose-led brands, and that could really be either side of the political spectrum. How do you balance staying true to your purpose with at the same time avoiding aiming at a constantly moving target? Even if you've made the decision like this is our purpose, we're going to stand to it, you can't really be out there responding to every single incident. So how do you strike that balance as a purpose-led brand?
Yeah, so you used a word, purpose, which I think gained currency a couple of years ago among brands who said, we really need to be very purposeful. We need to be purpose driven. We need to have a purpose associated with our brand, above and beyond, what I think is the purpose of most organizations, which is to make money for their stakeholders and to
Right.
create great products and kind of do no harm. And so I'm one of those people who's a little bit on the skeptical side about, should our brands businesses or are they purpose-driven organizations? Now, there are some organizations, B Corps specifically,
Mm-hmm.
which by definition have a purpose built into them. So whether it's a Ben and Jerry's, whether it's Chobani yogurt and so forth, and they intended by the scope of their governance documents and so forth to be purposeful. But then I think a number of other organizations, which were normal profit-making organizations, also sort of got on the bandwagon of this purpose mantra.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now, regardless of which side you are on, um, people may be backing away from that. People may, I suspect that we'll see people pulling back in terms of describing themselves around their purpose. And or if they still continue to talk about being purpose driven, it will be much more anodyne in terms of the descriptions of those purposes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And honestly, perhaps that tightened focus on what the purpose actually is tied to the business might in the long run be good for purpose. I feel like brands really wanted to bring in the as much heartwarming and warm and fuzzy stuff when purpose really had its moment a couple of years ago. Um, that tightening of focus might end up being a good thing overall, but that is to for time to tell. Now, when we return, we're going to take a look at the economic standpoint of this, going beyond just purpose and messaging to real world business context and consequences. When we come back, right after this. Ryan, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
How does my brand choose the right agency model that fits our needs?
Oof. Um, Good luck with that one.
Oh, okay. Can I ask you another question?
Yeah, sure.
What are best practices in managing talent development in a brand that also houses multiple product brands in the subdivision?
I don't know if I can help you with that one, Mike.
Okay, that's fine. Can I ask you a question, Ryan?
Yeah, sure.
What are pool supply sales looking like in the American Southeast in the last three fiscal quarters?
I haven't the faintest idea.
Oh my, Ryan, I'm so embarrassed. I have egg on my face. I was mistaking you for the ANA's Ask Research
Oh,
service. Oh my
I thought
gosh.
something was off.
I'm so sorry,
Why
Ryan.
would I
That's
know those
just
things?
absolutely silly. I'm thinking about the Ask Research team, the dedicated team of researchers behind Ask that does the legwork for you.
Mm-hmm.
Researches, distills, and organizes customized reports using ANA content and other licensed
Imagine
resources.
that.
My goodness. And if you think my questions are a little bit out there, you should go talk to one of our Ask researchers. They've heard it all
They sure have, yeah.
and they've provided the answers. Now,
Somehow.
yeah, truth. Well, let's.
Unbelievably so in some
Yeah,
cases.
I don't look behind the curtain there. I just let the wizards do their
Yes, I
thing.
think that's for the best.
Absolutely. Um, if you want to learn more about this, which if you're an A&A member, do you know how much it costs to ask one of our brilliant researchers the question that has been burning in your soul?
No, Mike, tell me how much it
It
costs.
costs nothing because you're an A&A member. And
Wow.
you're in the land of milk and
It's
honey
a member
here.
benefit. How
It's a
about that?
member benefit. It's a
Wow.
memben. Um, we're keeping that. So, for access to this memben, A&A members should go check out ana.net/ask. And now, back to our show. We are back. I am here with Jonathan Copulsky, and we are talking about the realities of being a marketer during this current administration. Before we broke, we talked a little bit about the purpose movement, how that's evolved, what that looks like now in a Trump administration. I would love to switch focus to an economic standpoint. Now, is there any way to fortify the business against the moving targets on this front? We have tariffs one day, then we don't. There's very little stability right now. So, are there ways to mostly avoid the fray when it comes to constant economic chaos?
Well, I have no confidence that I can predict what is going to happen in terms of the landscape of regulations, of tariffs, of economic actions, and so forth. And I'd love to meet somebody who thinks that they do have some confidence that they can predict that. And as you suggested, we've been living through this sort of topsy-turvy world where every day we're confronted with a new announcement, a new rumor, a new murmur of a announcement about something that's going to change, only to discover that's completely undone by the following day. So
Hmm.
I suspect that that's going to continue for a while. I'm not super optimistic that we'll have this predictability. And a number of commentators, including people from the right, have suggested to the current administration that predictability is what businesses are looking for, because
Hmm.
significant investments that people might make in factories and plants and equipment and so forth are made with the presumption of there will be a market that we can serve if we do the things that we'd like to do. So I think the predictability issue is a real one, and I'm hoping it gets resolved, but I'm not confident that it will be. So then we've got to think about, well, what's this world which may be unpredictable, and how do we prepare for the things which are unpredictable? So, in my life prior to teaching, where as a management consultant and as a chief marketing officer, one of the things that I suggested to my clients at that time was really to think about a playbook about what kinds of things could happen and how do we think about the actions that we would take once those
Hmm.
things happen. And to build out a sense of what are the different scenarios that could potentially take place. And under those different scenarios, how would we act? And then be prepared to be very nimble in pulling the trigger on following one, set of actions versus another set of actions. So we've got to be super good at really reading the tea leaves, following what's happening, be prepared to zig and zag, and also being able to move the organization at light speed once those things happen. So, tariffs is a good example. I suspect that, before Trump came into office back in 2016, most of us did not spend a lot of time thinking about tariffs. It was sort of a thing for some of
Right.
our trading partners, but this was not like a big part of how we thought about the world. And certainly, if you were classical Republican and free trade, it was all about lowering the barriers to trade between different countries.
Right.
So, at a minimum, if you're a senior leader in a branded organization, first, you better understand tariffs. You better understand the consequence of tariffs. You better have gone through an analysis of how they may affect your business and then how that might affect the potential investments that you might make, and then being able to build some flexibility or scalability into that. Now, the good news is in some businesses, we can be a lot more scalable now than we might have been able 20 years ago. So I think about technology
Hmm.
businesses. And one of the great things about technology is we've moved so much of the world into the cloud that we can scale up and we can scale down much
Hmm.
more easily than where in the past we might have had to build these big computer centers, we might have had to get all these servers and so forth. So looking at ways to make your business scalable, that may be through partnerships, it may be through new technology and so forth, I think will be an important strategy for lots of organizations. And we wrote a book, when I say we, myself, along with a couple of former colleagues from Deloitte, where I once worked, another colleague who's now currently at the University of Georgia, which was called the Transformation Myth. And
Hmm.
the transformation myth was all about looking at this world through this lens of disruption, which was particularly prompted by COVID-19.
Hmm.
And one of the characteristics of organizations that tended to do well in the midst of COVID-19 were companies that figured out how to scale up and scale down rapidly. And there, for some companies, it meant scaling up rapidly. For other companies at the same time with COVID-19, it meant scaling down rapidly. So
Yep.
thinking about how to make yourself more scalable to me is a key strategy in a world which is ruled by uncertainty and disruption.
Yeah, I love the way you laid it out there. And in that kind of nimble and contingency planning space, one of my very favorite quotes, I've no idea who to attribute it to, that is a running theme on this podcast. But it's something I really try to live my life by, at least in my work and my creative pursuits, is the plan until it isn't. You know, you make a plan, you follow that plan like it's gospel until the moment that that plan does not serve you, then that plan is garbage. We make a new plan, and that plan is the plan until it's not. And, you know, that's not a very comfortable world to live in, but I think it is the best way for marketers not to be caught off guard. You put together a lot of really great stuff there. I think that is one that the listeners might want to go ahead and run back that response before we continue. But rolling along, this is a conversation that we kind of touched on in an earlier talk, but is there a generational aspect to how brands respond to this administration's influences? And now, in that chat, we talked about how brand reputations and perceptions have faded, evolved, changed throughout the years. Does that change in a world of a ubiquitous and permanent internet?
Well, first of all, Michael, I got to go back to your quote about plans.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite quotes is from that very erudite boxer, Mike Tyson,
Oh,
who
I
said
love
that
it. Hit me, go, hit him with it.
everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that ability to be nimble and so forth, I think is one of the themes that, will linger, after this conversation's closed. So your question about generational shifts, generational changes, and so forth. And it's interesting. As somebody who's on, the older side, I just celebrated my 70th birthday. So
Happy belated, my man.
and and I am by training a historian, so I tend to look at
Mm.
history. So a couple of years ago, when people started getting upset about the rising mortgage rates, I think back to my first mortgage, which was in the mid 1980s, where the interest rates for variable rate mortgage were in excess of 13%. So I look and say 7%, like, wow, that's cheap. So I do
Right.
think there's some kind of perspectives on these things. So the current generation that, is predominant in the workplace, the younger one, has watched, since 2009, the market has expanded tremendously. The stock market
Mm-hmm.
has exploded until very recently. And they've, seen unprecedented levels of low unemployment, interrupted a little bit by COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think there was until very recently, the sense of, oh boy, I've got a tiger by a tail and I can do many things. And all of a sudden now, with all the uncertainty that we just talked about, I do think that people are suddenly maybe retrenching a little bit in terms of how they think about the world. So, if your goal was, I'm going to work from home and I'm going to be flexible, well, guess what? New world in 2025 versus where
Mm-hmm.
we were in 2022, 2023 when we had to work at home. So I think I'd like to believe that the younger generations are more optimistic or more passionate or more um, focused on purpose, all those types of things. I'd like to believe that um, they're ready to take some body hits for things
Mm-hmm.
leaving. But I'm now a little bit skeptical about that because I do see uh, people being very concerned. I mean, if you look at the vote that took place in the 2024 presidential election, we had younger generations actually voting in pretty considerable amounts for the current president. So I
Mm-hmm.
do think there's a shift, maybe left of center for those generations, and I think that there's much more of a focus on how do I get my fair share, particularly when my fair share is getting harder and harder to get. So currently, I'm not real sanguine that we're going to see people who are willing to make sacrifices at it because they're going to be challenged economically. And we all know that one of the big themes in the 2024 elections was people's concern about inflation, and particularly the price of food and other common commodities and so forth. So, at some point we may have the luxury of being more focused on issues, but right now I think
Hmm.
people are still very focused on economics, and the issues are kind of interesting, but we got to get the economics right for companies and for consumers.
That's so well said. And yeah, it's something that everybody needs to keep in mind when reality hits, principles, values, an ideal world and that stuff. It's a lot easier to discuss when you've got a roof over your head and three square meals. And that's a reality for everybody, no matter what you're doing right now, to kind of keep in mind. Not necessarily eschewing purposes and all of that things, but really think about where your consumer is in a very, very real state in 2025. I think you really set that up incredibly well.
Well, and I think when I think about the message that consumers want to hear right now, is some sense of stability, some sense of safety, some sense of somebody's taking care of them and allowing themselves to take care of one another. And so I do think, and you alluded to this previously in this conversation, I think we'll see more focus on warm and fuzzies
Hmm.
of the brand messaging and how things are a safe choice and how things provide stability and how this is um, you know people getting back to a good life and getting back to that. I think we'll see more of that in terms of brand advertising. I think we saw it in some of the Super Bowl ads that were very successful and effective this
Yep.
year, and that will continue. I do hope we get to more predictability. If I could, regardless of where you are in the political spectrum and on certain issues, I do think that would be incredibly helpful both at the consumer level, but also at the business level and at the brand level. So we know what game it is that but as I suggested, I'm not real confident that that will happen quickly, which requires, on one hand, nimbleness, and the other is, really having our antenna out to sort of read the tea leaves or whatever you want to call it, so that we can look at the signals. So in the military, there is a term called signal intelligence, and signal intelligence is
Yep.
really picking up all the different signals. And a number of years ago, I wrote a book about brand resilience and how brands could manage potential risk. And one of the things that we talked about in the book was the real need to um, understand those signals, interpret the signals, always watching out for the signals, and then understanding how to translate that to actions that your brand would take. We also talk in the book about, as something happen which may be damaging to brand, being very quick for analyzing it and rebounding from that. And you never know which stuff gets picked up by the press and which stuff will
Yeah.
kind of have a viral effect. So you have to be prepared for that and be prepared to have counterattack strategies. And the whole metaphor of the book was thinking about counterinsurgency and how when
Mm.
you have this insurgent waves of attack on your brand, how we could then enlist our employees, list our consumers, and so forth to help us to combat and counterattack against those insurgents.
Jonathan, I'm actually really glad you mentioned your book, Brand Resilience. It's a perfect segue where I'd like to leave our listeners. I think if we can agree on one thing, brands need to be resilient in these coming months and years. And you touched on a lot of fantastic stuff today, but are there any piece of practical advice you would offer advertisers who are still trying to wrap their heads around this and plot out a path forward?
So great question. And if I were still in my CMO role, and I've been a CMO in a couple of different organizations, I'd really be thinking about, how do I make sure I stick with the basics? And the basics to me
Hmm.
are being wonderful about understanding who my audience is, understanding what they're trying to do, what their objectives are in buying my brand or buying from my competitors, and being able, in very practical terms, to focus on how I help them to understand the benefits that they get from using my particular product or service and why that's better than the competition. So, in Northwestern University, when we teach this, we talk about segmentation, targeting, and
Mhm.
positioning. Those are kind of the ABCs. It happens to be the STP of marketing, but really, that's the basics. Do I have a clear audience? Do I have a clear set of targets among that audience? And have I positioned my product or my service so that they understand why I'm the preferred choice? I don't think any of that changes because of anything currently happening. So what does change is the need for nimbleness and the need to be prepared to swerve or zig when we zag, and being able to then kind of keep the course in terms of those core basics, but potentially vary practice tactics as we go through the day-to-day kinds of activities. And the other thing, once again, this has nothing to do with current administration. I do think we're seeing a sea change as a result of technology, including AI. And
Mhm.
so every brand that I work with and every brand that I teach about in my day-to-day work, the ones that seem to be the winners are the ones who really figured out how to lean into that technology as a way to transform their organization, to make them more efficient, make more effective. So I do think that those things continue regardless of the administration that we have. And it may change a little bit about our communications and the messaging strategy that we have, but we still need to be hyper focused on the impact that technologies will have in our business and how we can use them, and also understand how consumers are using them as well. So I always love sharing a quote that I saw from Condoleezza Rice a number of years ago. She was the Secretary of State for this first George
Mhm.
Bush, George H.W. Bush, and she said, "What at one time seemed impossible, in retrospect seems inevitable." And I think
Mm.
true, she was referring to geopolitics. And we could say that describes the world that we're in today. If I told you
Yes.
that this former uh, real life series television star would be not only president, but would be president twice, you would have said impossible. But now
Mhm.
it's inevitable. I'd say that the same thing is true with technology and the other changes that we're seeing. So I think just always being aware of what might happen and being prepared for that, which goes back to really having a clear eye on a couple of key indicators and building that institutional capability for signal intelligence is where I would place my bets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I know there's a natural tendency, a want to bury your head, but you just heard my friend Jonathan, you should be doing the exact opposite. You should be radar up, telescope up, looking for those signs as they come on the horizon. And just to tie it all up in a bow, when in doubt, go back to the fundamentals. I mean, I think that could really that's a wise piece of advice when talking about anything, be it the current administration, the tech wave, the changes in consumer behaviors. When in doubt, get back to the fundies. Jonathan, this has been a fantastic, really thoughtful conversation. I can't thank you enough for being our guest here on Scope.
Thank you for having me.
Another episode of On Scope, the marketing podcast in the books. I want to pass my sincere thanks along to Jonathan Copulsky for engaging me in a vital and necessary conversation. If this episode made you feel a little uncomfortable, good. I'm telling you, the only way out is through. As a reminder, if you have a topic or guest that you'd like to see on Scope, shoot us a note at onscope@ana.net. And as always, here's your moment of marketing meditation. Take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and consider the following from Dieter F. Uchtdorf. It's your reaction to adversity, not adversity itself, that determines how your life's story will develop. Think on that, and we'll see you next week.